So we're going to look at the question today of obedience. And obedience is a very, very tricky question because, our faith as Catholics, it's founded on obedience to Christ and to the church that he founded. And so the whole religious spirit is founded on this premise of obedience to our Lord and to his church. And when we look at the question of obedience, obedience is what we call a moral virtue. It's a cardinal virtue. It's not one of the three theological virtues. Three theological virtues are faith, hope, and charity. They deal with God. Now, anything that doesn't deal with God, when it comes under the question of virtues, St. Thomas Aquinas says that virtue always lies in the middle between two extremes. So you want to do a mortified deed, you've got to be balanced. Okay, it's between excess of being gluttonous and being over mortified to the point of causing yourself harm. So there's a virtue lies always in the middle, but that doesn't apply to the theological virtues as such. It can in some ways, because you can't love God too much. You can love God too little or not enough, yes, but you can't love God too much. You can be silly in your faith and foolish in your faith, yes, but as such you can't have too much faith, that is believing in God or trusting in God. So that doesn't apply to the theological virtues, but it does apply to all the moral virtues. There's virtue lies in the middle, and that's the same thing when it comes to obedience. Obedience is obeying a just command of a superior for the sake of conforming either to Christ or for the sake of the common good. And really the just ruler in the mind of the church has that authority for the sake of ruling for the common good. And in the flyer where you're going to see, it explains very much the question of the two excesses in obedience and where obedience lies. And part of the problem today is, and you'll see this, so for example with the older generation, they were almost basically taught to blindly obey everything that the priest says. Whereas the younger generation, they obey nobody unless it conforms with what they like. But I will say here that the younger generation are often more objective. So even, for example, in their voting for a party, often they'll be able to say, well, no, this party they're not going to vote along the lines of what their parents were taught. They'll be able to judge it based on what they can assess if this is reasonable or not reasonable. Same thing, you often find that a lot more younger people coming to the tradition because they don't carry all that baggage of blind obedience. Whatever the father says, and you've got to go along with what the church says, right or wrong. They say, hold on, what does the church teach? What does the present church teach? And they see that there's an inconsistency. And then they can say, well, that doesn't add up. And then they judge there's a problem in the church. And then often they find their way to our chapels because they don't have that baggage, which basically in the past, a lot of people abdicated their brains to the clergy without thinking. And you can somewhat do that in a time where everything is fine, somewhat. But often it means that your own knowledge of your faith is somewhat superficial too. So that also comes with problems. And I don't want to go into all the problems that it did cause later on when we so much bad things were taking place in the church. Everyone just swept them under the carpet, and we're paying the price of it today. So, but obviously it comes with a price. In the mind of the church, the obedience is there, the authority is there, really. Above obedience is the authority is there, put there in place to rule, to govern for the sake of the common good of the people. That means the laws that they give, the things that they impose, must be in accordance with virtue, in accordance with truth, and in accordance with justice. And when they don't conform to that, then our obligation to obey actually ceases. And here Francisco Suarez, who's a great theologian in the church, points out that if a pope gives an order contrary to custom, he should not be obeyed. If he attempts to do something manifestly opposed to the justice or to the common good, it will be lawful to resist him. If he attacks by force he can be repelled, with the moderation appropriate to a just defense. Now, the point that he's getting at there is that the purpose of the authority is is there to guide, to lead, to defend, to protect those under them. When they after, and you see this in every field of authority today, and particularly like the popes. And when I was going through this book, They Have Uncrowned Him, Archbishop Lefebvre, and I'm going to quote from him shortly, but he pointed out with regards to Paul VI. Paul VI states that the Latin language is a great treasure of the church, and how brilliant it is, how excellent it is, and it should be maintained in the liturgy. But then he says, the next line, a typical psychopath, he says we're going to sacrifice it for the sake of everybody being understood. The problem with that is, and you see this with all those in authority today, who think that the authority is theirs, therefore what belongs to the church belongs to them, therefore I'm free to dismantle this bit or get rid of that. Well, the church, hold on, the things in the church actually, they're not yours, they don't belong to you. You're a custodian, therefore your duty is to build it up, to protect it, to guide it, to defend it, to expand on it, but not to discard it. You don't have any authority in that period. It's not for you, it doesn't belong to you to get rid of it. And this is the problem in almost every field in life. It's for me, and you see this with our government, you see this in every field in life. I can get rid of it because hold on, you're there for today, and you're there to build up, to protect. You're not there to destroy, to undermine, to modify according to your own desire. That's not how the church works. That's not the role and the goal of authority. But that's what's unfortunately been the problem. And here I just want to start by quoting the Archbishop, who gives, I think, again, the best mindset in summarizing the mind of the church with regards to this whole question. He says the psychology of such a liberal pope, he's talking about Paul VI, is rather easily conceivable, but it is more difficult to uphold. It puts us indeed into a very delicate situation vis-a-vis such a head, whether it be Paul VI or John Paul II. In practice, our attitude should be based on a previous discernment, rendered necessary by these extraordinary circumstances of a Pope won to liberalism. This discernment is this: when the Pope says something that is consistent with tradition, we follow him. When he says something that goes contrary to our faith, or he encourages or lets something be done that harms our faith, then we cannot follow him. The fundamental reason for this is that the church, the Pope, and the hierarchy are at the service of the faith. It is not that they who make the faith, they must serve it. The faith is not being created, it is unchangeable. It is transmitted. This is why we cannot follow those acts of these popes that are done with the goal of confirming an action that goes against tradition. By the very act, we would be collaborating in the utter demolition of the church, in the destruction of our faith. Now it is clear that what is unceasingly asked of us, complete submission to the Pope, complete submission to the Council, acceptance of all liturgical reform, this goes against a direction contrary to tradition, to the extent that the Pope, the Council, and the reforms carry us far away from tradition, as the facts prove more every year. Consequently, to ask this of us is to ask us to collaborate in the disappearance of the faith. Impossible. The martyrs died to defend the faith. We have the example of Christians imprisoned, tortures, sent to concentration camps for their faith. A grain of incense offered to the pagan god, and immediately they would have saved their lives. One once, he said, advised me, sign that you accept everything, and then you continue as before. No, one does not play with his faith. So that's the solid principle upon which we base our resistance to what is going on.
What page is that on in the book? Sorry.
Sure, the page is in the Archbishop, they've uncrowned him, and it's on the chapter of 32 on suicidal liberalism, the post-conciliar reforms. So the Archbishop is explaining, no, it's actually the chapter 22, which is our attitude towards a Pope, Paul VI, the liberal Pope. we've only gotten worse since Paul VI, who really was a destroyer of our holy faith, along with the Pope that we are dealing with now. And we'll come to those things. St. Thomas Aquinas says, regarding unjust laws, or you put out, he says they are, in his mind, an act of violence. He says, saying that, wherefore such a law do not bind in conscience, except perhaps in order to avoid scandal. So you might comply so as not to cause a scandal, but as such, they don't oblige. Anything that goes against the common good, anything that undermines the justice, has no obligation for us. And an Archbishop, already back in 1974, says that, and his professor in seminary, Father Lefloc, said that they are going to build one day a heresy which will be used to undermine the church, and that is an exaggerated reverence for the decisions of the popes. And by this, they were going to use obedience to undermine the faith. And so Archbishop Lefebvre says that Satan's masterstroke will therefore be to spread the revolutionary principles introduced into the church by the authority of the church itself, placing this authority in a situation of incoherence and permanent contradiction. So long as this ambiguity has not been dispersed, disasters will multiply within the church. We must acknowledge that the trick has been well played, that Satan's lie has been masterfully utilized. The church will destroy herself through obedience. You must obey. Who or what you must obey, we don't know exactly. But woe to the man who does not consent to this false obedience. He thereby earns the right to be trampled up underfoot, to be calumniated, to be deprived of everything which allowed him to live. He is a heretic, a schismatic, let him die. That is all he deserves. Satan, says the Archbishop, has really succeeded in pulling off a masterstroke. He has succeeded in having those who keep the Catholic faith condemned by the very people who should be defending and promulgating. Satan reigns through the ambiguity and incoherence, which are the means of combat, and which deceive men of little faith. Satan's masterstroke, by which he is bringing about the utter destruction of the church, is therefore to use obedience in order to destroy the faith, authority against the truth. And this is what we are seeing. And that reference was taken from his October the 13th, 1974 anniversary of the apparition of Our Lady of Fatima. In his open letter to confused Catholics, and I won't quote him much more, but he points out that ultimately that two religions confront each other today. We are in diametric situation, and it is impossible to avoid a choice. But the choice is not between obedience and disobedience. What is suggested to us, what we are expressly invited to do, what we are persecuted for doing, is to choose an apparent obedience. But even the Holy Father cannot ask us to abandon our faith. We therefore choose to keep it, and we cannot mistake in clinging to what the Church has taught for 2,000 years. The crisis is profound, cleverly organized and directed, and by this token, one can truly believe the mastermind is not a man but Satan himself. For it is to a masterstroke of Satan to get Catholics to disobey the whole of tradition in the name of obedience. And that's what we are seeing today. That the key argument they are used, and it's interesting, back in 1974, the Archbishop pointed out that anyone who opposes it will be trampled underfoot. And today, the number of cancelled priests, even again, diocesan priests who have been cancelled for simply stating Catholic doctrine, teaching the faith, is just growing every and for doing what they should be doing as Catholic priests. And so again, here let's just quote Saint Bernard, who's a doctor of the church. He says, "He who does evil because he has been commanded does not perform an act of obedience, but rather of rebellion. He upsets the order. He neglects obedience to God in order to obey men." And Saint Peter said to the Sanhedrin, it is better for us to obey God rather than men, when men go against what God himself has laid down for us. And the reason that I will give a few more quotes is because it's important for us to understand that everything that we are doing is actually already been taught for us in the past precisely to do. It's not that that we're just telling you some nice things and follow the priests. No, as I said to, again, a group of religious, recently conservatives, I said to them, listen, Father, at the end of the day, me and you, we've both read one thing in common, that is the manuals of the church, the manuals that you were taught in the seminary, we both read them. So what I don't understand is how you can uphold your false position when it's very clear that the manuals maintain the position that the Archbishop is maintaining. Very clear. And again, we can quote authority after authority. It's true that in practice, it's not easy to uphold the position of the Archbishop, because as these priests find themselves, is once you maintain, you say to your bishop, you're a modernist, you're doing evil things, we can't support that. What happens? They put you on the street. As I said to the same priest, I said, Father, at the end of the day, let's be honest, if you spoke the truth, how long do you reckon you'll last? 10 minutes, 15 minutes? That's about it. So it really comes down to the reality of, we have these superiors who are modernists, who have gone against the faith. Pope Gregory the Great, knowing that evil ought never to be done by way of obedience, though sometimes something good which is being done ought to be discontinued out of obedience. So again, already the church fathers are very clear. Pope Benedict the 14th, whose famous document on they would use for understanding more clearly the question of the holiness of saints, in treating of heroic virtue, says, a superior is not to be obeyed when he commands anything contrary to divine law, nor is an abbot to be obeyed when he commands anything contrary to the rule. According to the well-known letter of Saint Bernard to a monk, Adam, a blind obedience excludes the prudence of the flesh, not the prudence of the spirit, as is shown at length by Suarez. It's very clear then, and the point that I want to draw to you there is that really, and as I get older, it becomes very clear. Cardinal Newman stated, when he looked at the Arian crisis, the Arian heresy in the 4th century, most of the bishops went along with the error of Arius, which is to deny that Christ is God, equal with the Father. For them, he was a lesser creature than God. But most of the bishops, 80% and even more, consented with that. And so you have a major problem here. The majority of the bishops who the church faithful looked to for guidance embraced heresy. And to some extent, they didn't really necessarily understand it, much like most of the bishops today. Most of them have never read the documents of Vatican II, but they certainly do go along with the modernist ideas. They certainly don't believe and think like Catholics anymore, certainly not nowadays. But what is very clear is they have embraced the whole perverted ideology of the modern world. That's very clear, and you see this on a regular basis. But what's interesting is Cardinal Newman's response is to say that, in his view, at that point in the history of the church, the governing authority of the church was temporarily suspended. Now, you don't have to maintain that position, but for me, whether you maintain that position or not, what is absolutely clear is that the obligation of the faithful to obey these bishops today has ceased. It's no longer there. Much like, for example, somebody who's a father in a house and is being brutal, beating up the members, or doing violence, or behaving in a way that's not fitting for his office, and being a drunkard or what have you. At that point, likewise, the obedience to that as the ordinary authority would cease. In that case, the mother would take the place and try and govern the household as best as possible. Same thing for us today. Our obedience to these bishops has ceased because they have embraced their modernism, either directly or indirectly by their failure to teach, govern, and rule the church in their diocese. And that applies to really almost 98%, if not 99%, of the bishops worldwide. Now, that might sound like a very startling statement, but the obligation to obey ceases once they cease to teach the faith, because they are there because of the faith. In fact, once you cease to actually hand on the Catholic faith, you actually shoot yourself in the foot, because you're a bishop of what? The Catholic Church. So your duty is to act as a bishop of what? The Catholic Church. So when you cease to act like as a bishop of the Catholic Church, actually, morally speaking, juridically speaking, your authority is still there as far as jurisdiction. But morally speaking, the obligation of the faithful ceases once you cease to teach the faith, and especially once you continue to undermine the faith, regardless of whether the Pope punishes you or not, suspends you or takes you out of office, unless you recant your heresy, repent of it, the moral obligation of the faithful ceases. And this is where we are in today in the crisis. Our obligation to obey is no longer there, because their faith is no longer there. And you saw this in same thing in the 4th century. St. Athanasius was excommunicated by Pope Liberius. And what was interesting, the title of the actual document was, "We are desirous of peace." Today, the same thing. They are desirous of peace, but at the same time, to ensure the worldly peace, they have to attack everybody who opposes their false humanistic approach to the faith. And we're seeing this more and more. For us, then, I know again it seems very, very difficult position to maneuver through, because the danger is this, that when we say we don't cease to obey them, then who do we obey? Well, much like during the Arian crisis, we unite ourselves with those who represent the voice of Christ, those priests, bishops who are teaching the Catholic faith. And I'll make it very clear, the society is not saying we are the church, there's no salvation outside the society, or that our position is the only position that is possible in the Christ. No, we are saying that our position is the one that fits in most consistently with church theology, history, and our faith. It's a prudential judgment prudential judgment on how best to respond to the situation we're in. That's why, as a consequence, and I know we get attacked for the same thing. Well, Father, you guys also set up canonical commissions for looking at annulments. It's a very, very daring, bold thing that you're doing. Yeah, but it's the same premise. If there is a crisis in the church, if they are wolves and they're modernists, would you send your children to the wolves? No. So why would we send them if they've got a question about their marriage? And again, even in normal times, the diocese makes a decision of annulments. They're not infallible decisions. They're prudential judgments that are not even made by the bishops. They're just made by a group of priests or lay people that they put in charge these days. And today, there's hardly somebody who applies for annulment who's not that today. They annul everything. They make a mockery of something that is sacred. But our position is not because they make a mockery of it. Our position is very consistent. They are destroyers of our faith. We don't send. You don't feed your children poison. We don't feed the ones who come to us, who cling to us and our guidance. We don't send them to the modernists. That's our position. If they've come to us and they've previously had an annulment from the diocese, we don't start to investigate. It's not our problem. It's not our issue. They went to them. They received a decision to them. That's their problem. We take a prudential judgment on that. But when they were our parishioners married by us, well, they've got a problem, they've got a question, well, we try to give them our best decision based on the traditional and even the modern laws of canon law. It's just a prudential judgment, and that's all it is. It's not, but it's based on what? The premise is the same, that there is a crisis in the church, and if you can't see it as a crisis in the church, then you are intellectually dishonest. There's no, and as I said earlier, that as Mark Twain said very well, that no amount of evidence is going to convince an idiot. So it's just the fact of what we are seeing today around the world, not just Australia, America. It's universal. It is a universal crisis, and in some countries, it is true that in some countries, maybe especially like the African countries and the Asian countries, the faithful in general and the bishops in general, they're more conservative. They are more conservative. But as a whole, they've accepted and swallowed all the lies and propaganda that is part of the official church today. And it's dangerous from that point of view that today we've started to think that, much like I'm sure that most of you think that modern life is normal, because Australia is particularly Australia and the West, pretty ordered. There's government, there's laws, there's structure. You think it's normal, but it's abnormal to go through society and life without any reference to God, to the teachings of the church enshrined in society, that's insane. That's insanity. And most people live without purpose. Same thing in the church. Accepting this new mass, accepting these new ideas which go against 2,000 years of Catholicism as normal, it's absurd. And this is what we are seeing today. Do you have any questions before I go on about anything so far?
Sorry, just on the marriage tribunals, I know that was a point that John Salzer actually promulgated or prosecuted the SSPX after he left it.
Yes.
That it was actually, the SSPX did accept and adopt a formal status schism because they were, I think the argument used was setting up their own parallel authority structures, and the tribunal, the example you used obviously tonight, that's always been the kind of official thing on schism, where they set up their own.
Yes, that's right. So that's a good point. One good priest friend yesterday, he asked, he said, do you have in the society, do you have cathedrals? And one of our priests said no, because that would mean that our bishops have ordinary jurisdiction. So we don't. All our bishops do is they go around performing the sacraments, but more than that, they have no ordinary jurisdiction as bishops, and we don't claim that. Same thing with the Toronto tribe. It's very interesting with the whole question of our dealing with the Vatican today. And this is, again, I've pointed this out to many priests. The Vatican today, as such, in practice, deals with us as though we are part of their structure. So if I want to perform a marriage, I write to the bishop for permission. Again, amongst our own parishioners, we write for permission. Yes, Father, they send it back. This is the form you fill out, and yep, all good. Same thing with our faculties for confession. That's ordinary jurisdiction we use from the Vatican. And even our dealings with the Vatican, they've never once brought up to us, oh, hold on, you've got this canonical commission about marriages. And again, remember that Campos, which was under our apostolate, they were the, if you're not familiar with Campos, when Archbishop Lefebvre performed the consecrations in 1988, another bishop, Bishop Castro de Mera, came along and joined with him in the consecrations. And basically, most of the parishes in his diocese went with him, and he was working in union with us. When he died, and we replaced him with consecrating another bishop for them amongst their priests later on, just not long ago, was regularized with Rome, their bishop, and they're all regularized. Rome never brought up to anything to them about this whole question of the annulments and the questions that they did regarding either their marriages or the marriage tribunal. It was non-issue for Rome, because for them these are insignificant, and not only they're insignificant, but it's consistent with the position that we hold. If you see that we are modernists destroying the faith, even we would say to you, don't bring them to us, because we were going to destroy their marriages. That's what we're going to do. So they recognize that. They don't ever question us regarding that, nor have they ever said to us, okay, we approve your marriages now, but what about your marriages in the past? They never brought up any of that. They know that we are more stricter than they are in regards to following that. And I'm going to bring this point up because, and I see this all the time, this hypocrisy regarding obedience. So the modernists don't believe in heresy. They don't believe, because everything is true. Islam is good, Buddhism is good, every religion is good. But when it comes to traditional Catholics, all of a sudden they remember the word heresy. Oh, you're in heresy. Hold on, how does that work? And then the funny thing is, you're being Protestant. Hold on. But the modern church regards officially Martin Luther as a great reformer. You say the Mass of Martin Luther, which is essentially the Protestant liturgy. So you say the Protestant liturgy, you praise Martin Luther, you regard the Protestants as your separated brethren, and then you accuse me of being a Protestant as though it's a bad thing. So make up your mind. It's either good or bad. I know it's an ad hominem argument, but it's an argument they actually can't answer. Because on one hand, the modernists believe all religion is good. Every religion is a way to salvation. So then why don't you apply that to the traditional Catholics? Oh, no. Because see, these rules, again, goes back to what I said. These rules, these laws of the church, they are there given to you to govern, to lead, to guide. Once you reject them, once you reject the faith, the premise upon which they're based, you actually have no right to use them against Catholics anymore. The question to oblige obedience, it's lost. Once you lost the faith, once you stopped teaching the faith, the obligation of Catholics ceased. Your attack against them as being schismatics, heretics, lost its power. And that was, during the 4th century, what happened to most Catholics? They were exiled. Most of the good bishops were exiled. most of the Catholics were kicked out of their parish. And the Catholics would have nothing to do with the Arians because they understood very clearly. And it's a bit harder today because they don't come out explicitly and say, we don't believe this anymore. They don't say that. Slowly now with the synod, they're becoming more and more coming out saying perverted things. And the bishops are coming out and saying more and more perverted things. And it's becoming clearer which bishops, like Bishop Strickland in America, is being persecuted just for upholding conservative values, really. And he's by no means a traditional Catholic, but certainly conservative. But they're persecuting them. Why? Because they want to finally eradicate from the church those who hold the Catholic faith. This is their goal. And all the more, therefore, we should not be intimidated by the question of obedience. Materially, yes, materially we are disobedient. Materially, you have to disobey today, something which is wicked. And I kind of wish on a secular level, more children would today disobey their parents because their parents teach and promote evil things. Sorry, that's just the reality. I wish more children would stand up and say, Mum, Dad, you're mad, you're insane, this is wrong. Just from a common sense point of view. And you are seeing a lot of people, they come to tradition, they're young people, they're on their own. You see the parents, they brought them up badly, the wrong values, wrong morals. They reach in there, they look at, there's got to be more to life than this. This doesn't make sense. But and again, thank God for the social media, the internet, where it brings out at least where there is a crack in the narrative. It shows that those who are looking can find the truth, because you get on the newspaper, you look on the TV, there's nothing there. But at least if you find out they're looking up the Catholic faith, and it's good to see that a lot of traditional Catholics are getting out there. They are, when the Pope gets up and makes a message, they leave a comment saying this guy is hypocritical. The Pope recently said, well, the church is for everyone. Well, then he puts out a document like Traditionis Custodes and condemns his own conservative Catholics. So it's obviously not for everyone. It's only for those who follow their agenda. And again, a perfect example of this during the French Revolution. What was the motto cry of the French Revolution? Fraternity, equality, liberty. Okay, but at the same time, they were guillotining every day in the thousands people, chopping their heads off. How are we talking about fraternity, liberty, equality, and then we're cutting people's heads off? Well, they don't conform to our liberty, our equality, our freedom. That's all. It's not about equality, freedom. It's not about being transparent, loving the truth. They don't love the truth. They love their own agenda, and this is why you're seeing today more and more those in authority think not only the authority is for them, but they are above the law. So this Pope follows no canon law, does whatever he wants. No, he's not bound. And again, with Bishop Strickland, other bishops have pointed out the Pope cannot just remove you. He's got to have follow the code of canon law. And just can't remove it because he doesn't like you or you're conservative. It's got to be you're teaching heresy, but those that are teaching heresy, they get removed. So what law is he following? Nothing. Not following any law. He's his own law. And that's why a lot of people say to me, how do you work out this Pope? I said, you can't work him out because he doesn't follow any rules. He's a modernist, and you'll see this with him. And Paul VI and John Paul II. One line, they say things that are traditional Catholic. The next line, totally anti-Catholic. In the same sentence. That's like Paul VI. As Bishop Lefebvre pointed out, one line, he says, beautiful, Latin, the liturgy, sacred, been part of our church for years, must be treasured, and but we're going to sacrifice it. It's like a psychopath. But these people, once you take authority like that, you do become a psychopath. Henry VIII was like that. Henry VIII, total psychopath. In the end, decided, I am the head of the church. I decide. No, you're not the head of the church, and no, you don't decide. You're not above God. He made himself above God. And that's when St. Thomas More said, no, sorry, we don't comply. That's against the law. The law is there for the common good. You're not above the law, not even as a secular head. And again, he's not saying, I don't respect your authority, I don't think that you have a right to rule. No, absolutely have a right to rule. But the right to rule is also founded upon certain basic principles. That is, the rule there is by God, so you can lead for the common good. You are not the common good. The law is not about you. It's about leading the people. You're an instrument of that law. or the legislator who's bound by clear laws. The Pope's also all the more bound by laws. And in reality, of course, it comes down to, in practice, that it does come down in practice to having bishops and priests who have enough, not only courage, but enough understanding of the faith to be able to say, hold on, this is wrong, and we stand you to the face. And remember, Saint Paul rebuked Saint Peter over a very insignificant thing, him not eating with the Gentiles. He thought that was a scandal, and he withstood him to the face. All the more knowing, Saint Paul knew that Saint Peter was the head of the church, he's above all the apostles, but for all that, if he goes against Christ, he goes against the faith, we withstand him to the face. Because St. Paul makes a very, very interesting statement. He says, I have no authority unto destruction, but only unto edification. That is, as an apostle, I don't have any authority to destroy the church. I've only got authority to build it up. If an angel, says St. Paul in his letter to the Galatians, or myself, or anyone comes and says a different gospel than what I preach to you, let him be anathema. Anyone, whether it's an angel from heaven, whether it's the Pope on earth. And in the past, popes treaded lightly because they knew that they were surrounded by very well-informed men who would and did oppose them when they went against the faith. Today, because since the council, less and less bishops with integrity. It's just by exception that you see bishops like Bishop Strickland and Mueller and that. But a lot of these bishops, the older bishops, they're just dying off. Very few still with enough integrity and sense of the faith. And this is what the church has always taught, that the faithful ought to have enough, what we call sensus catholicus, and that's a true term, sense of their faith, that automatically when they hear something that's not right, they automatically say, all right, that's not right, and we oppose it. That's why when Nestorius was denying that Mary was the mother of God, it was one of the laymen in the pew who stood up and told him, you're wrong, and I oppose you. And he denounced him, condemned him from the pulpit, from the pews. That's his duty. His duty is to as a layperson, to oppose. Here, let me just quote that great author of that well-known book, Liberalism as a Sin, Father Don Salvani. He writes that the faithful are permitted and even commanded to give a reason for their faith, to draw out its consequences, to make an application of it, to deduce parallels and analogies from it. It is thus by their use of their reason that the faithful are unable to suspect and measure the orthodoxy of any new doctrine presented to them. By comparing it with a doctrine already defined, it is to be not in accord that they can combat it as bad and unjustly stigmatize a book or journal which sustains it. They cannot, of course, define it ex cathedra, but they can lawfully hold it as perverse and declare it as such, warn others against it, raise the cry of alarm, and strike the first blow against it. The faithful layman can do all this, and has done in all the times with the applause of the church. Nor in so doing does he make himself the pastor of the faithful, nor even its humblest attendant, but simply serves it as a watchdog who gives the alarm. That's all he's doing.
What was the book?
That's the Liberalism as a Sin by Father Don Felix Sada Salvadi, on page 164 and up to 167. So it's very, and I'll give you the references all in greater detail. But here Dom Goran J states the same thing, a great liturgist. He says, he's talking about the Nestorius, he's coming up. Eusebius, a simple layman, rose to give expression to the general indignation and protested against this impiety. This generous attitude was the safeguard of Byzantium and won the praise of the popes and the councils. When the shepherd becomes a wolf, the first duty of the flock is to defend itself. And to be, in all fairness, really, the traditional movement is not really it wasn't really a priest-led movement. It was the lay people. Remember, and all these bishops we've got in the society, but someone like Bishop Tissier, he was a young man at the time, and he went to Archbishop Lefebvre and says, we need your help. They're not teaching us right in the seminaries. We need your help. You got to come to us. It was the lay people that came to the Archbishop. And the lay people in those days recognized the voice of the Archbishop, particularly in France and Europe. The amount of love and devotion they had to what he's saying, because they knew their faith. So today, the young people in the modern world, they're not brought up with any religion or any real faith. They don't know the catechism. They've never been to a Latter Mass. They don't know what the heck the Latter Mass is. So to put out an ad, come to the Latter Mass, thinking, what in the world is that? You know, it's not like in the days of the Archbishop. Everyone knew the old Mass. And when he spoke, they understood. They could recognize the voice of Christ because they knew the faith. Today, it's much harder for people to recognize that voice. But the Archbishop here says, we are attached indeed to the Pope, for as long as he echoes the apostolic tradition and the teachings of all of his predecessors, it is the very definition of the successor of Peter that he is the keeper of this deposit. That should be an obvious, and that was obvious once upon a time for us. You know, it was recently this heretical bishop who stated, you know, he's saying that people cannot go against the doctrines of Pope Francis. And since when in the history of the church does a pope have doctrines? Never. His doctrine is the teachings of the church. And if, as I wrote to this author, I said the doctrine of the pope should be in the catechism. You should try reading it sometime. You know, it's the catechism which should be the doctrine of the pope. The pope is not above the traditions, the customs, the liturgy of the church, and it's sad that we have allowed them to get away with that. You know, and I want to just quote for you Bishop Athanasius Schneider, who's a living bishop in the church, and who, for me personally, is the only bishop in the church today who everything is taught from day one is 100% consistent with the teachings of the church. And here he says that, and he was responding to a priest recently, conservative priest, I'm not going to fault him, but who got up and decided that Pope Francis is not the Pope. But this bishop responded, Athanasius Schneider responded, explaining this point. He says, the theory of automatic loss of papacy due to heresy remains only an opinion. Even St. Robert Bellarmine noticed this and did not present it as a teaching of the magisterium. The perennial papal magisterium never taught such an opinion. The Pope cannot commit heresy when he speaks ex cathedra, intending to divine. This is a dogma of the faith. In his teachings outside of ex cathedra statements, however, he can commit a doctrinal ambiguities, errors, and even heresies, and that's absolutely true. And since the Pope is not identical with the entire church, the church is stronger than a single error or heretical Pope. In such a case, one should respectively correct him, avoid purely human anger and disrespectful language, resist him as one would resist a bad father of a family. Yet the members of a family cannot declare their evil father deposed from the fatherhood. They can correct him, refuse to obey him, separate themselves from him, but they cannot declare him deposed. And I don't have the references here, but the great minds of the church, when they discuss this question of a pope teaching heresy, are very clear that even for the sake,
Sorry, was that in relation to Father James Alden?
Yes, that was in relation to that. And the reference is the Bishop Athanasius Schneider letter to the Remnant newspaper, dated the 9th, the Americans, they put it back to front, so the 9th month of the 18th day, 2023. So that's a very recent statement. But the Pope, as Pope, he's not, so when a Pope is made Pope, he's elected. He's not consecrated, he's not ordained. So it's an election for what? To govern the whole church. So it's about governing, which means it's ultimately, he doesn't take on a new ordination, a new ranking. What he takes on is a new power of jurisdiction. And that power of jurisdiction, in the minds of the great theologians of the past, and I'm happy to give you references for that, that would remain even if the Pope became a heretic, because his person, the papacy doesn't depend upon his person, it depends upon his office. And an example of that, a very good example of that, is a bishop, and this is stated expressly in canon law. So a bishop who teaches heresy, his juridical acts remain binding. His heresy doesn't become binding, but his juridical acts remain binding until he's deposed by his superior, which is the Pope. But until then he's deposed, all of his juridical acts remain in effect. So the same thing we are saying with the Pope. Who's going to oppose the Pope? The church says, in practice, nobody, but a council, general council could come together and just declare the fact. But in practice, all those things are very hard to do. And I don't want to get too much into that. But let's take it away from the papacy. So if you had a corrupt person in government, we can't just depose him. We obviously do have to follow the legal channels to get rid of them, the probes and investigations, or a military coup or whatever. But the point is, we can't decide one day either, and I can assure you that there is not a politician that is leading our country that isn't corrupt today, and for very grave reasons. But even that is not enough to say, well, we don't obey them. No, because until they're removed from office, their acts remain in effect. And the same thing in the church, where it's even more reverence and respect has to be paid to the office, not necessarily to the ego of the person. So this is the point. And the reason why the theologians state that is because the common good of the church is at stake here. And so for that reason, God would still ensure that he is the Pope, regardless of his heresy. But his heresy would mean for us, as I said earlier, that our binding, the obligation to obey them ceases. And this is the situation that we are in today. Our obligation to obey somebody teaching or commanding heresy is no longer there. We may choose to obey certain things which are conformal to a faith, and that may be, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, and I quoted earlier, he gives more other reasons, but just to avoid scandal. So it's sometimes, when we write, as you know, today we write to the bishop, can we do this wedding for Mary and Louis? Yes. We do that to give as best for those who are weak in their faith, that we respect their authority. We don't say that we don't have any, that we don't regard them as Catholic, even though they're not Catholic, de facto they're not. But to maintain, at least for those weak in their faith, we try to show them as much respect as we can, without in any way giving in on any of the false errors, principles, ideas that they want to impose on the faithful. So there is sometimes, again, it might be a question of prudence, it might be a question of, but it's not a question in principle. I agree with them that we cannot do without betraying our Lord. And this is a hard thing for us today, because not only do we become unpopular, but really there is a stigma. And a priest who loves souls knows that this stigma hinders us from reaching so many souls because of the stigma that's against us. Oh, you're with the society, or you're not under the Pope. Well, we are, but we're not really with this modernists. It's a hard thing. So that they're often very good souls. They're souls that want the truth, but this question of obedience, the question of understanding the relationship to the hierarchy, can be a hindrance for them, and that in some ways often does hinder our apostolate, and it is a sad thing, but it should never stop us as priests from continuing our duty, because those who want the faith will the reality is they will overcome that hurdle. They will make that hurdle and say, okay, I can see that what's going on. I can see the wickedness of the bishops. I can see that the condition they want for us to obey. And really, again, all those fraternity and all those other conservative groups, they wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the Archbishop. And the more I get older, the more I go back to the writings of the Archbishop, the likes of this man, the wisdom, the integrity, the prudence he chose in corresponding, in dealing with those in authority, destroying the church, I don't think you'll ever see anything like this today in our time. The closest is Bishop Athanasius Snyder, but he's not he's an auxiliary bishop. But as far as challenging the authorities for their wicked, their modernism, their perversion, a man like this we may never see in our lifetime. What a great man who had the courage, the integrity, and the principles. Many times they offered him many things. We'll give you bishops, but we're on this term or that. He could see through that. He could see that they were not honest, and he could see what, again, me and you would, humanly speaking, we would never have seen. We would never been able to see. It's only by looking back now that we can see, the things that the Archbishop was saying, or if we want, complaining about back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Today, we think, well, if only it was just that bad. Today, it's gone to the point of insanity. But he could already see it back then because he understood the importance of the principles upon which they were basing their direction. Today we don't often understand those principles, and that's why for me it's more important, more and more, to go back to not only the Archbishop, but go back to the writings of the popes who enunciated the evils of the modern world in very clear detail, which allowed us to think. And for more and more I see that a lot of the priests and a lot of the bishops actually didn't care to read what the popes were saying. And much like today, most priests, most bishops, most lay people don't read. They just blog or surf the internet with headings and that's it. There's not a lot of depth, and a lot of priests and bishops, and even traditional priests, don't necessarily study and read. They go off what they were taught in the seminary. They remember that, and it's often about it, but after a while you forget. That's why you've got to go back, you've got to keep reading to make sure that our mind is in conformity with the mind of the church. Whenever we judge something that's coming out of Rome or the Pope, it's not, it doesn't sound good to me, I don't like it. No. What is the church saying? And I want to emphasize a point which I did in my talk on the duty to resist a few years ago, which was online, that the crisis in the church, it is a crisis, but doesn't mean it's a free-for-all, all right? What I mean for that, it doesn't mean it gives us as Catholics the freedom to do as we please. No, it doesn't. We always have a duty of respect, of obedience to someone. Me, I have a duty to my superiors to their superiors, and our superior has some contact with Rome, just to ensure that we try to comply from a juridical point of view. Theologically, we worlds apart, infinite worlds apart, and we acknowledge, we have to be honest about that. That theologically we are infinite worlds apart. In the past, the heretics in the past, even if you want like Luther, you can see Luther's writings. He's trying to reason through his heresy. This Pope doesn't even try to use reason. He's just all emotional. So we are even worse than in our dealing with if we were dealing with Luther. This guy's not even rational. It's just a blob of emotion, and his emotions change on the day that he's talking, on the person he's dealing with, on how he feels that day. That's all it's become. And the bishops are just saying, yes sir, 3 bags full, whatever the Pope says. There's no integrity amongst most of them to say, well, hold on, that even contradicts what you said yesterday, or what you said this morning. You see this all the time. In the morning he says one thing, afternoon he said like the very opposite. The other day the Pope was praising this great missionary priest. Hold on, but Holy Father, you said we should not evangelize. Like, how does that work? Well, it's not even rational anymore. In one hand he's saying one thing, another thing. So we have, on our part, we have to be aware of that. What are we dealing with? What are the constraints that we have as Catholics from a theological point of view, from a moral point of view, from a juridical point of view? It's not a free-for-all. And that's why often I would say to people, Father, they'll come to our parish, and I said to the priest, look, if someone wants to get baptized in our parish, make sure you check with the parish priest, because often they come from another parish, Nova Scotia or Latter parish, and then they ask us to baptize them. I said, hold on, no. You go back to them, say, where's your parish? Ask the permission of your parish priest, and if he doesn't give it, we're not baptized. Because it's not a free-for-all. I would want to respect him and would like him to respect me. If you showed up at his parish and he baptized your children, I'd be offended. That's not the way we operate as Catholics. There's a rules. Who's responsible for you? Who's accountable for you? It's not a free-for-all. Yeah, communion you can go to any parish, but not for the major sacraments like baptism or confirmation. No. Who are you under? Who's responsible for you? It's not a free-for-all. You're not free to do what you want. And if you've got a question, ask those. Get some guidance from the priest. And what's it based on? When Father's saying, is it based on what Father likes, or is it based on the principles of the church? You have to, and I think that's a very important. The Christ in the church is not a free-for-all for the laypeople, nor for the priest. Father, what's your plan? What are you doing? Who are you working with? What's the organisation here? And the free-for-all, again, and it's a danger for a lot of people, is today on a level of being conservative and appearing traditional. A lot of the faithful go to the Orthodox, for example. And again, a lot of the Orthodox in their liturgy, they are beautiful. And I often make this principle regarding the Orthodox. The Orthodox in their liturgy, they are Catholic, but in their faith, they're heretical. The Nova Scotia Catholics, in their liturgy, they're Protestant, but in their doctrinal faith, they're Catholic. That's why when a Nova Sordo comes in, we give them communion. We don't presume just because you go to Nova Sordo you're not Catholic. In your creed, you're Catholic. But of course, the bishops and a lot of the clergy, they are. You don't know. It's you know, you go to whatever parish, you don't know what you're going to get today. And that's one thing in general, with at least the conservative, the traditional priests. You ask a society priest in general any question on the faith, whatever priest you speak to is going to say the same thing. It's one same religion, one same faith, and it's not based on what they think, it's what the church teaches. So again, we do have to have, and that's why I know, and again, it can be stuck in your face. Oh, Father, I don't obey because I think you're a heretic. Based on what am I a heretic? What's the principle of that? What's the teaching of the church that I reject or deny? It's not just a statement. Again, this is the same danger with just deciding, I've decided the Pope is not the Pope. Well, if you can decide the Pope is not the Pope, that's a very dangerous premise. Then who's to tell you anything? Well, nobody can tell you anything at that point because you've decided. And therefore, if you decided, therefore that's the law. No, well, that's ridiculous. You don't even have the authority as a layman or as me as a priest to depose a priest. I can't depose a priest. So if I can't depose a priest, how can I depose the Pope? You can't. You've got to be honest here. I've got to be honest, and that's very important. We have to be able to call a spade a spade. Today, a lot of people, they can't do that. They can't admit that the Pope is doing wrong. That's a blind, not only is it blind obedience, but it's giving to the Pope and the papacy something it doesn't have. You're giving it to the status of God. It's not God. The papacy is not an end in itself. Not even being linked juridically to the papacy is an end in itself. Again, like in the 4th century, there were bishops in the 4th century going around consecrating other bishops without the permission of the Pope because they had a duty in that time of crisis. Same thing now. Yeah, we operate in an extraordinary way because, again, even as somebody who doesn't have much of an intelligence can tell you we've got a problem in the church that, humanly speaking, can't be solved. It's not a question we can just go to the Pope and discuss it with him. He's the rot. The fish rots from the head. That's the problem. And we've had that for the last 4 popes. And if you go into the encyclicals of the popes of the past and you line them up with what is being taught today, it's beyond comprehension, the depth of perversion. So I don't want to keep going on about the same point. But we do have to at least understand in the back of our minds, there are principles that govern for the church, there are principles that govern for us, and the crisis in the church is not, doesn't give us the liberty to do as we please. It's not, and as Catholics, we should have a place we call our home, our parish. This is, for you, most of you made it your parish, but where's your parish? Where's your family? And often people will say to me, we're conservative, we want to get married, and we want to get married here, but we're going to go there for Mass. Like, oh, where's your parish? It's not, I don't believe in I'm for this club, I'm for that club. No, where's your family? Where's your parish? Who's going to be accountable for you? And that is very important. And that you do your duty to support those who support you, and you have the priest has a corresponding obligation to support you. So one of our faithful said, "Oh, Father, I'm moving to this faraway place. When I get a funeral, when I want to die, will I get the diocese to go?" I said, "No. Doesn't matter where you are, India, China, we go there. It's our duty. You supported us, we support you. It's our obligation to you because we're responsible for you." That was normal in the past, but again, we don't think like Catholics anymore, and that's no good. The crisis in the church should not be a premise for us to think like Protestants. They all pick and choose the church they go to on a Sunday. No, the Catholic Church, it's a family, it's a hierarchy, and there's a responsibility, there's an accountability. That should be normal. It's not a free-for-all to do and that's to protect you, and it's also to make me accountable for what I say, what I do. I have superiors. I can't just make up what I want and give you, and it's a dangerous thing, give you my version of the church, my version of tradition. No. I am not the church and I am not tradition. We have to make sure that it's not my version of this or that. It is the church's version, and it lines up. Okay, there are some things which are, you'll see different chapels do different things based on the custom of that town, that village. That's different. Those are not the tradition with a capital T, the teachings or the doctrines of the church. But those smaller customs there, they can be defined by local habit, country, culture. That's neither here nor there. We're not talking about those things. That they can be, the priest can have set up even customs himself for the parish, which it can be very helpful to make the place a better place or protect better the parish. With the church. We try here to do that with a Christian of insisting on conservative modesty of dress. Those are not dogmas, but they come under the models of the church. We try to insist on that to make it a much more pleasant atmosphere of the faith and respect for the faith. So, you know, those are the underlying background of things that when we approach these questions, once upon a time we would have this in the back of our mind. And I just wanted to make sure that you understand those things, because then we don't know what tomorrow holds, but what you build today is going to make tomorrow better or worse, based on your formation, what you understand, what you build is what we are building for tomorrow. Our work is not for today, and our parishes are not for today. They are for the work to come, and it depends on what we do today is going to impact what happens tomorrow, and that's very important for us today. Sometimes our chapels are 10-man mass centers here and there, but it's not about the numbers. It's not a numbers game. It's about souls and the good of the church long term, and that we must always try to think of. And that was the goal of the Archbishop. The Archbishop did the greatest thing in consecrating bishops and ordaining priests for the church, and that will continue. And all these other conservative groups, they are around because of the Archbishop and the work of the society, which stood the popes to the face, and it still continues that work worldwide, and it keeps growing worldwide. So that's all I have to say. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost. As it was in the beginning, is now, and shall be, world without end. Amen. Our Lady, Seat of Wisdom, pray for us. Saint Thomas Aquinas, pray for us.
We have a blessing.
Your blessing, benedictus, Father, Son, and Spirit, Spiritus, et Maria, Semper, Amen.